Yeah, yesterday I turned the computer. I was like, oh, my computer's running a little slow. I should restart it, to clear the memory and the buffers and all that. Because I haven't restarted it in a while. I usually just put it to sleep. And when I restarted it, it didn't come back up. And I'm like, ah. My tech guy, thanks Andy, by the way, is says there's a cord that might be going bad inside the desktop, and he's going to replace it for me as soon as he gets a new one. But that's going to be sometime next week. But until then, just be careful. And it's not like it's gonna die like immediately, but it is something to keep an eye on. Blah blah blah. You know how it is. But it was just awesome of him to come out and fix it immediately. And so basically that's all it was. It was just like turn it on at 5 o'clock. I turned it off and turned it back on again because you do that from time to time just to let your computer awaken again or whatever. And it just didn't. That's pretty much all that happened. And that was that freak out moment. And of course on this computer is all of the Twitch stuff, all of the OBS to record and broadcast. So I didn't even have access to leaving a message because I couldn't remember my login because I tend to just leave it all on one computer. But I'm going to fix that. I'll make sure I have at least one other login so that I can, drop a line that's a little bit more reliable and let people know that there's a problem. So anyway, as yet I haven't got the new lines to fill in the blanks for episode 8. So, what I'm thinking I'm going to do with today is clean and break up the lines for episode 9, which is sort of dull, but at the same time, I'm going to answer some questions and we're going to show some stuff, just refresh on some stuff that maybe some of the newer people just joining us missed out on in earlier episodes. Among those, one of the questions that has come up is how to put in plugins. Now, I use a couple of plugins obsessively, one of which is Pop Mute, right here, and one of which is Room Machine. And, and so they're, I use them so much, I just take them for granted because they really do make my life so much easier. But, if you don't know how to put them in, then they don't help, obviously. So let's talk about putting in these. Now, what Pop Mute does, in case I'm assuming that there's somebody lurking here who hasn't seen everything I've done. That's one reason I'm going over some of this. Pop Mute takes any bit of your track which is above a certain point and brings that little bit down. So if I highlighted this and I said, my threshold, the threshold is how far down it is. If I said, anything below 5 comes down by 1, then, it's going to come down by 1 until it hits 5 and then it's going to stop coming down. And in the volume amplification there. And the number that you put in Pop Mute here, this is how far from the edge of the track. So I could say if it's more than 3, if it's outward of 3 from the edge of the track, bring it down, or outward of 5, or outward of whatever. And I can decide different numbers. I bring it down by only 1 or 2 at a time because that is like a slow reduction and it doesn't make the sound warped by bringing the volume down too much. I did a little piece on this. It's up on YouTube specifically on that. Hi, Guardian. And so what we've got, so to put in Pop Mute or Room Machine or any of these that I use a lot, though they're going to go into your effect menu, and you'll see I've already got them, but I'm going to show how to put them in. I put in G-Verb, and I put in Pop Mute and Room Machine, and I actually don't use a lot of the effects in here. I don't use hardly ever. And not for any reason except that I don't know what they are or what I would do with them. I mean, but it keeps it simple, really. I play with them once in a while, and I probably should know more. But anyway, the way you insert it is you go in you'll get a file. It'll be a DLL or an NY. Those are the types of plugins. And you'll go into your. I don't care. You'll go into your program files. It's usually under the 86 one. You go into Audacity, and then you just go into plugins and you drop them in here. You can download them on the internet. They are distributed free, just like Audacity is. So if you can't find them, come to you. If you Google search, you could probably do Audacity pop mute plugin or Audacity room machine plugin or whatever. There are a bajillion plugins out there for Audacity, and any of them you just pop them into your plugin directory. Or I assume you could put something in here, Nyquist directory, but I don't know much about that. They all work if you put them in the plugin directory. And, I mean, all the ones I've ever used. I got Reverb, I've got Room Machine in here. Room Machine, Pop Mute, all my favorites. So, once it's in here, you restart Audacity because it won't automatically register them. And then the next time you open it up, they won't be here. They won't be here. You heard me right, because you have to go into the Add Remove Plugins window. And any new ones you just added will probably be down at the bottom, and they'll say New. And you have to turn them into Enabled using the Enable. You click on them and then enable them, click Enable, and then say OK. Then they'll show up. And if they don't show up right away, you close Audacity and open it up again so that it loads up properly. So yeah, it should be super duper simple to get it in there. The Audacity really is meant to be pretty easy to use, no matter how. I mean, I've always found it fair. Well, okay, there was a learning curve. There's always a learning curve. But I was also trying to figure it out all by myself for the most part. So that was really hard. As I've said many times, I am self-taught on this. So I do things in my own way, and I know that there may not be the proper way, but I don't care. So, first thing, I'm going to start cleaning these files, and this is a good chance to watch a lot of cleaning of files. One of the things I do is I bring down the pops and the large, just because I want to get things away from the edges. That's when you get stuff that's damaged. And now, here's some of Jane's did blow the gain in here. You can see that it's cut off on the edge. And I'm just going to have to really watch that. When you blow the gain, what that means is when you're recording, you record so loud that it goes outside the edges of your little strip here. And that means that your volume is so much that the microphone can't take it all in. And parts of it are going to get cut off, and that's a bad sound. So one thing to always watch if and when you're recording or you're recording someone else is to always watch the recording on your screen and make sure they're not getting too close to the edge so that it's going to blow the gain. There are the ways to deal with that. Usually if you have a preamp is the box that connects the microphone to the computer, and it usually has knobs on it that have things like gain. You can turn the gain down there. That's like turning down the incoming volume instead of an outgoing volume, if that makes sense. And that will help keep it basically just, turns down what is accepted, and you get a little bit more leeway as to what can come in. Don't usually, unless you're doing screaming and yelling, you're really better off not having your actor back too far off the mic because it will start to sound weird. You don't want your actor up on the mic too close. Usually, most of us, for a simple measurement is if you hold your hand up with, the thumb and the pinky finger out, like you're going to be like, hey, brother, for Hawaii, or if you're going to say, I love you with the other finger up in sign language, And that's about as far as you want to be from the mic. Put your thumb on your lips and the pinky at the mic. That's you don't want to be up on the mic. You want to be a little bit off when you're talking. It's a general rule of thumb. Question. Okay, David, I was fooling with Audacity this evening and I added a water brook, but when I added a voice track, it was way too low compared to the water effect. Okay, well, one of the things, obviously, is if you look at your waveforms, if you're looking at some of this sort of thing, and you see, if this was your voice, and say this was your stream, that would be an obvious disparity in volumes. Usually, background noises, I would keep, well, here I go talking about the volume gain again. Your amplify, effect amplify. When you open up your amplify box, this number is, that it automatically populates with, is the number between the highest point in your track and the edge. So right now this is 5 down, okay? 5. And I would always make background noises at least 25 down. So I'm going to go minus 20 if I was going to do that to make it, because I already have 5. So minus 20, bring that way down. And because background noises never need to be particularly loud. And you can go, you can actually still hear things at minus 50, even though it's the lowest you can go. If I open up, say, let's do a comparison here. Everything is closed. Where's my... I hate it when everything gets closed. Well, it all had to get closed because, of course, I shut the computer and opened it up again. Hello, bunny. Yes, sweetheart. I'm just looking for one of the... Well, let's just take some music. Okay, so we've got... This is a piece of music, and it is already at 13, 14 down. Yes, bunny. You gonna visit? This is my cat. For anybody who hasn't heard me talk to her yet. So, now, right now, the music sounds like this. You can hear... I just realized I haven't yet played any sort of like track off of here yet. Did that sound okay? Could you hear that well enough? Because I know we've had issues with the difference between the volume from my microphone and the volume from my playback a couple of times. So I'm just expecting the worst. Just drop me a line. I'm going to grab a voice. I'm going to wait a second because I know there's a lag on the chat room. Just let me know if you heard the music. Not on the table, bunny. Not on the table, sweetheart. Do you want to say hi to the microphone? No? She's a quiet girl. Okay, good. Thank you. Now I have a cat. Okay, but if you see here, for instance...
Though he wasn't the brain behind the whole thing, he was a crafty beggar.
You see how, I've got it very much off as far as a balance goes between the voice and the music. Now, the first thing that I'll generally do is I will default to... Minus 25 is sort of my... I don't have a hand-free bunny. Minus 25 is sort of my default as far as amplification goes. So I'm going to go minus 12 to add to the 13. And you can hear here.
Though he wasn't the brain behind the whole
thing. So you can still, at minus 25, you can still hear the music just fine. I can even probably take it down by the same amount again.
Locked up. Though he wasn't the brain behind the whole thing, he was a crafty beggar.
It depends on what your intention is with something like music. And of course, conversely, you can take the voice up. Now, remember, while the music is a fairly consistent volume, the voice goes up and down a lot. So this number that populates is the between the highest point in this entire voice track and the edge. So if I take that up, it doesn't necessarily mean every bit of the track is going to be volumed up, just that one that touches the edge there. But this way, you can see how...
locked up. Though he wasn't the brain behind the whole thing, he was a crafty beggar.
Now, another things you can do to... Oh, you can hear her? Beanie. Other things you can do to balance. I mean, the straight amplify, volume down the music, volume up the voice is the absolute basic. Okay, I gotta let you go up on the back of the chair, sweetheart. I need my hands back. She's a good girl. But I'm just gonna take this piece here and we'll just go to the end. We'll just use this for an example. Another thing you can do, if I did have this volumed back up to 13, which would be like 25, add there, back up to kind of where it started. One thing you can do is you run a high-pass filter. My standard number for a high-pass filter for general cleaning and voices and things is 300. It usually just takes out some of the low notes.
Locked up.
You won't hear a lot of that, but it takes out some of the deepest bass, which you will hear under certain circumstances. And I might do a low-pass filter. My default on that is usually 1,000, and that takes out, it just dulls down the high notes, so they're a little bit...
locked up. Though he wasn't the brain behind the...
I don't know if you can even hear the difference.
Locked up. Though he wasn't the brain behind the whole...
Do you hear the difference? I mean, just listen to the music.
Locked up. Though he wasn't the brain behind the...
So it just dulls it down a little bit. I mean, obviously none of those are going to be perfect, but there are ways to do it without taking it just straight down volume. There are different ways you can manipulate it. Another thing you can do is play with your stereoscape.
Locked up. Though he wasn't the brain behind the whole thing, he was a crafty beggar.
This version of the game.
Good to know he's safely locked up.
Volume.
Though he wasn't
down
the brain
into the
behind
point where
the
you
whole
want it.
thing, he was a crafty beggar. Please have a seat, Inspector.
So, I mean, there's a number of different ways to experiment with your balance. I mean, here, now, if I take this down because you can do this while you're listening, which is one of the most awesome parts of being able to use this gain here. The problem I have with it is you can't make it stick exactly. If I gain this down to, to a point where I like it, and then I copied it and pasted it, this all reverts to normal numbers. And that means that this is back to the way it was. That's why I always, when I gain it down, I'm like, okay, minus 15. I'm going to do that as a permanent change and then bring this back to 0, because that way it can't get screwed up. And, yeah, you always, it's partly a balance, but generally speaking, my rule of thumb for background noise is always minus 25. I mean, that's where I start with, and then I play it by ear as I tune it, and that way, I can, minus 30 is good, it all depends on,
Locked up.
what
Though he
you're
wasn't
trying
the brain
to do.
behind the whole thing,
And again,
he
you can
was
move
a
it to the
crafty
side.
beggar.
I could also do something like this, where I split the stereo track, and then, it's now then we have the left and the right off to the sides.
Locked up. Though he wasn't the brain behind the whole thing, he was
and
a
I can bring
crafty
each
beggar.
side down a little bit.
Good to know he's safely locked up. Though he wasn't the brain
that's taking
behind
it
the
up.
whole thing, he was a crafty beggar.
There's all different ways you can play with a background sound. Now, with music, you obviously have to keep it together, keep the two sides in sync with each other. But if you don't, you can get some interesting effects. Now, I'm going to use the shift key and the cursor key and just take two little steps. So it's almost, actually one little step, so it's almost invisible. And then delete it. And that's going to put the music slightly off sync, just a tiny bit.
Though he wasn't the brain behind the whole thing, he was a crafty beggar. Good to know he's safely locked up.
And if I did that again...
Locked up. Though he wasn't the brain behind the whole thing, he was a crafty beggar.
It starts to eventually almost create reverb. Whoops. Blah, blah, blah. It starts to actually eventually create reverb of a sort.
Locked up. Though he wasn't the brain behind the whole
you can
thing,
start to
he
hear
was
that
a
it's off a
crafty
little
beggar.
bit.
Good to know. Locked up. Though he wasn't the brain behind the whole thing,
It's almost like it's a little bit of an echo. In fact, one of the easiest ways to create reverb on a voice is to duplicate it.
Though he wasn't the brain behind the whole thing, he was a crafty beggar.
Is to just duplicate the track and take a teeny little slice out of it like that.
Though he wasn't the brain behind the whole thing, he was a crafty beggar. Good to know he's safely locked up.
And then you can always do something like change where the voice is.
Though he wasn't the brain behind the whole thing, he was a crafty beggar. Good to know he's safely locked up. Though he wasn't the brain behind the whole thing, he...
Do you see what I... You know, there's all sorts of different ways you can play with stuff to try to create a different sound. And that's one of the things that, you know, it's... I think that I have the benefit of, because I didn't learn properly how to do things, that I just made shit up sometimes and got there in the end somehow. But yeah, you know, so these are some general rules of thumb. I did have, let's see, we had a question from the internet. It's like magic. I've been uploading a whole ton of I've been uploading Bingo the Birthday Clown to YouTube. It's going to be playing every Wednesday for ever. And I debated on putting up like conglomerate episodes, but I decided no, it's going to run for 30 weeks because that was how long Bingo the Birthday Clown runs, 30 episodes. And someday I will do a second season of that. But oh my gosh, it is long. Now, see, I covered yeah, I did cover how to put in your plugins. So, the question that I've got from Biotasm on YouTube is, had the most trouble creating the right voice effects in certain environments, like distinguishing between a narrator voice and a performing voice, or a voice outside or behind you or far away, or right next to your ear, or in a cramped hallway or an open field. And, okay, so I'm not perfect with this, and I know there are better ways to do it, but I'll do as much as I can on that. What is this piece of paper? And also, how do you select specific music for certain moods and scenes and emotions? That one is a lot more subjective, but I'm gonna address a little bit of the voice first. I mean, the biggest thing, I'll just use Gerald. Well, actually, Gerald's not the best one because he's already a little over processed. I'm gonna take Jane here. We'll go to a new screen. Now, this is, it's kind of tricky because I usually have to dick around a little bit before I get what I want. Now, this is not a clean track. This is going to be a, you know, there's probably all sorts of background noise in this.
Fancy the seaside. I've a notion. Brighton sounds lovely this time of year.
So, now, there are ways. Let's see. First off, behind you is the one that I've never managed to do well, because 360 sound is a whole different ball game than just stereo sound. And the closest you can often get is, create the illusion that they're behind another character, or that they're coming in from like way off to one side. I mean, you could presumably put them a little bit off to the side and bring the volume up. I mean, you don't want them to be loud.
I have a notion. Brighton sounds lovely this time of year.
See, her voice is warm enough that it sounds close, and I should really clean this track if I'm going to be playing around with it, or the noise is going to drive me crazy. I usually do a high-pass filter at 300, which
Brighton sounds lovely this time of year.
Which takes out a little bit of the depth of the voice, but it also cuts out a lot of the buzz. And then I'm just going to go steal the... pardon my... where did I put the voice? It's under episode... No. With the noise samples. Annie... Wait, must be up here. Jane's noise sample. I'll get my noise profile. I mean, I could make a new one, but it's just faster once, because we did record them all in roughly the same space and time.
Fancy the seaside. I have a notion.
So, to bring somebody closer, you usually make them louder.
I have a notion. Brighton sounds lovely this time of year.
And you can move them farther away still.
I have a notion. Brighton sounds lovely this time of year.
Or farther away.
I have a notion. Brighton sounds lovely this time of year.
Now, one of the things that I've been doing, that I keep saying, talking about, is things like, if I have somebody outdoors, I'll run the high pass at 500 on top of that, which then creates this sound.
I have a notion. Brighton sounds lovely this time of year.
It just takes out a little bit more of the low... Excuse me. It takes out a little bit more of the... The 300 takes out the buzz. Depending on what I'm working on, I'll run that lower. I mean, it's fine for female voices. Sometimes if I want to keep a male voice, keep the gravel in it, I'll run it lower and then have to do better cleaning afterwards. Basically, running the high pass filter to begin with helps make the noise reduction run more smoothly, because it takes out a lot of what the noise reduction would be taking out. And so it speeds up the process and makes it run easier. The less you take out with the high pass filter, the more you have to take out with the noise removal or noise reduction. So it's a give and take, but it can make a huge difference, because of course the higher the high pass filter number, the more you're going to cut out. And think of it as whatever the number you're putting in is like you're blocking a hallway with one row of Legos or big Legos or Tetris or whatever, for every 100 number you put in there. So 300 is blocking 3 layers, and everything below that can't get past it. If you put it at 500, you've got more below being blocked by this wall. The higher the number, the more gets blocked. Oh, I hate daylight savings. I hate daylight savings. Don't blame me. I didn't make it. I bitch about it all the time. I'm glad you found us again, though, Haddock. But, so that's, I mean, the thing to remember is the high pass filter lets high notes pass, and the low pass filter lets low notes pass and cuts out high sounds. So what happens if I take this track here, because I've run the 500 to make it, because I make it sound. I think taking a little bit more of the low notes out makes it sound outdoors because high notes carry more in an open space. So
I've a notion. Brighton sounds lovely this time of year.
so it just sounds a little bit more remote almost. So that you've got, you put that against an outdoor backdrop and it sounds like they're standing at well over arm's length talking. If they're going to be super close to the listener, you'd still keep the huskier tone because
I've a notion. Brighton sounds lovely this time of year.
you've got a lot more. It sounds much closer and intimate the more of the huskiness you've got, because the low notes don't have to carry far if the person's right on your ear. So, but, then if you want to run a high pass filter higher,
I've a notion. Brighton sounds lovely this time of year.
you start to sound like you're on a radio. Oh, I hope so. I hope they get rid of daylight savings time. I don't care which way we choose to go. I just want to go one way and stick with it. But, the idea is that, the conspiracy theory at least is that since it's not really particularly necessary anymore, the main idea for it is to keep everybody off balance twice a year so that, we're all obedient little cogs in the wheel or whatever. Frankly, I just wish somebody could convince Trump that Obama invented it so that he'll rescind it instantly because he just hates anything Obama did. And then Trump will at least have one thing to his name that we don't hate him for. Anyway, so if I keep running, if I run the high pass filter again,
I've a notion. Brighton sounds lovely this time of year.
and this is how you get telephone type voices and radio type voices, is you run it. You run the high pass filter.
I've a notion. Brighton sounds lovely this time of year.
Now, as you volume it up, though,
I've a notion. Brighton sounds lovely this time of year.
it still sounds like it's on the radio, but at least, you can, to take something all the way to a radio sound, you have to add in, a little bit of crackles and things like that, usually. Like a walkie-talkie type radio. But, the big thing is that for the most part, radio doesn't have much bass, so you're taking it all out. Now, conversely, if I took this and I run a low-pass filter on it...
I've a notion. Brighton sounds lovely this time of year.
Does it? I've heard that. You keep running the low-pass filter.
I've a notion.
And it
Brighton
starts to
sounds
sound
lovely this time
like
of
they're
year.
farther and farther, they're behind a wall. Because this
I've
is...
a notion. Brighton sounds lovely this time of year.
Because if you've ever listened through a door or something, you hear sort of the rumble of the voices, but not the high notes. While outside, you'll hear more high notes than you will low notes. So...
I've a notion. Brighton sounds lovely this time of year.
You could keep on running it just
I've
to
a
see how
notion.
far you can get.
Brighton sounds lovely this time of year.
So, that's the high pass and low pass filters are the basic stuff to use to create different effects with voices. And of course, you can move them left and right so that you've got different like...
I've a notion. Brighton sounds lovely this time of year.
Or you just get weird like me and do something like this where I go... where I go, oh, here's left and here's right. Never 100, always 90. Stupid solar systems. I fade one out and fade the other in.
I've a notion. Brighton sounds lovely this time of year.
And you can see Though, oddly enough, even though it's fading into the low pass version, the high pass version overwhelms it because the high notes will always overwhelm the low notes. They just carry better. That's the explanation for bagpipes, believe it or not.
I've a notion. Brighton sounds lovely this time of year.
Bagpipes, of course, were used in battles to play, battle songs and presumably to pass messages, I would assume, in some way. But the idea that high squeaky noise will carry for miles through open country, because those high notes will go. They go forever, and so the whole army can hear that pretty much no matter what. That's my assumption. Don't quote me on it. But and that's one of the reasons that you think of the outdoors, you think of high notes. Anyway, now for a narrator voice, this is one of those that I always have to dink around with. I had it down for a while when I was doing Fatal Girl, but it's been a while. It's some variation on reverb, and I would have to figure it out again, so I duplicate the track. Now, the simplest way to fake reverb, if you can't remember, is to put a tiny bit of space in.
Fancy the seaside? I've a notion.
Maybe not quite that much.
Fancy the seaside? I've a notion. Brighton sounds lovely this time of year.
That's not a very good sound. I don't want to deal with that. Well, there is that too. Anything that sounds like you're killing screaming pigs constantly. No, I like bagpipes. Actually, if they're well done. If they're not well done, they can die. I want to do, for a zombie walk sometime, I want to do a full kilt outfit with like the bagpipe chanter stuck through the forehead. I think that would be fun as a zombie bagpiper. Come into the light, Karen? I don't know the quote. So what we can do is, now there's a difference between, I have G-verb and I have reverb, and I use a lot of the defaults because I don't like changing the numbers because I don't know what they mean, and I should, and I plan to, but I would rather just find numbers that I can use. So if I take and just run the G-verb on this one, now I'm going to take this way down. This is why I do minus 25 as my default for a lot of things. Whoops.
Fancy the seaside? I've a notion. Brighton sounds lovely this time of year.
Now you'll hear it's very metallic. And poltergeist, yeah. You get a very metallic sound. This is why I usually run a low pass filter as soon as I run a reverb of any kind.
I've a notion. Brighton sounds lovely this time of year.
And I'll keep taking this down. I'm going to hear
I've a
this
notion.
line forever.
Brighton sounds lovely this time of year. We'll be away for a week. We'll still be in when we get back.
I mean, you can play with the volume here as you listen to it, which is nice, as I've said. Another thing you can do is play with the placement in the soundscape. So if I keep the real voice closer to center and send the reverb one farther away.
I've a notion. Brighton sounds lovely this time of year. We'll be away for a week. We'll still be in when we get back.
So there's different ways you can play with that, with where you put it. Now, this was G-verb. Let's do the reverb. I hear a difference in them, but I haven't used them in a long time. Theoretically, there isn't really that much difference. But if I take it to minus 25 and run my low pass filter on it, so it's the same that way. The that's the G verb, and this.
I've a notion. Brighton sounds lovely this time of year.
So that's a clearer sound for the voice itself, less muddied. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. I meant to mute that one.
I've a notion. Brighton sounds lovely this time of year. We'll be away for a week.
This might be a good sort of narrator kind of voice, and you have to balance it. You might take down some of the original voice. I'm a firm proponent of no matter how weird you make a voice, you always keep a real track. So if I wanted to turn her voice here, let's pick a different line because I'm tired of listening to that one. If I took this line, whatever it is, and decided to make it into a monster voice, okay, I'm going to make her into something, just a troll or something here. I'm going to bring up the volume. We'll duplicate it. I'll go ahead and use these. Oh, I forget I've got it set to do that. Take one track and I'm going to go, okay, I'm going to change the pitch. I'm going to pitch it down by 5 just to see what happens.
We'll still be here when we get back. No cob can run forever without a rub and some rest.
And now pitching it down does shift the speed just a skosh, whether it's supposed to or not. And you can see that if you line this up. Well, I guess that's not as bad as I thought. It does seem like there's a little bit of... When you run those sort of effects, a lot of times it puts a little line at the end. It's annoying because then it tells you can't do anything until you get rid of that line.
We'll still be here when we get back. No cob can run forever without a rub and some rest.
Yeah, I know. There's all this is you're getting into making different kinds of things. Well, I'll run the pitch again.
We'll still be here when we get back. No cob can run forever without a rub and some rest.
And yes, so I got the exterminate reference. Trust me. But anytime I did something like this, I would keep the real voice track close to center and move the lower or creepy voice out of the way.
We'll still be here when we get back. No cob can run forever without a rub and some rest.
And that way the voice is always registering, the ear is always registering a clear track, even with all the other tracks. If you listen to something like Dragon, the episode that I did called Dragon, the dragon voice, I did so many different things on the dragon voice, but if you really listen, you can hear the normal voice of the actor at the center of it. And that's where you can pick out his words, no matter what else I did. Because I could take this and put on, the reverb and be like...
We'll still be here when we get back. No cob can run forever without a rub and some rest.
And just keep, you can add on and change. And this is what I would do with the troll voices coming up in the Trial of Myriad, is I'll take... Are you saying the dialects are attacking? Conjugate. No. Revenge of the dialects. One thing I do like to do as a fun thing to create a weird effect for like ghosts, this is a particularly fun trick, is I will take one of these duplicates and I will reverse it. And then I will run reverb on the reversed track, and then I'll reverse it back. Because then what you get is this.
We'll still be here when we get back. No cob can run forever without a rub and some rest.
Because reverb tails off after it, And this is after, but backwards. So it's kind of swooping in on it. And depending on how you build it, you can have a lot of fun with that, with the pre-verb.
We'll still be here when we get back.
No cob can run forever without a rub and some rest.
I mean, you can do reverb the other way on a different track. Well, it's the reversing it. That's what it comes in on it. And this was reverb I'm using for these. You know.
We'll still be here when we get back.
No cob can run forever without a rub and some rest.
So, yeah, well, in a way, but Twin Peaks, they also did speaking backwards, which is why when they turned forwards, they sounded odd. That would be a lot more work than most I know would be willing to put in. Hello, buddy. So, but yeah, you can do all sorts of different things, but as long as you keep at least one central track, and you can even high pass filter it so it sounds almost.
We'll still be here when we get back.
No cob can run forever without a rub and some rest.
If I run a high pass filter on it, we're pushing this track toward sort of the radio sound, but we're also pulling out some of its sound but keeping the words so that it's still like the guide track, but it's not influencing the overall sound quite as much. I know, there's so many different ways to do simple things to play with stuff. I kind of got lost on that. And I was talking originally sort of about voices that are close up or far away or any of those. And let me grab another clean track again since I got carried away there. Far away is another tricky one because obviously we're dealing with only so much of a soundscape. And, wait. Oh, I grabbed one with no voice in it. Well, here's a line.
Don't do anything foolish, girl.
I mean, you can hear I'm already far away on this track. Ha 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 ha. I was trying for something with a little bit quieter voices here. Now let's see. Gerald. Oh, let's grab some of me for a change. Here we go. Let's play with me. Play with me. I'm so lonely. Okay, here's Annie.
Rush in? Maybe find something to rush in. Maybe find something to.
And now, far away, I mean, the easiest concept, of course, for far away would be something like, just quieter. You know, you think of it as being, you know, oh, just quieter. Oh, we'll go -10. Sounds farther away.
Right. Oh, right.
But now, if one thing that I'll almost always do is I try not to leave any people right at center axis here. Right at the center of the screen, especially if you're far away. Because using the left to right can create a lot more.
Oh, right.
You know, you get a sort of a feel that they're farther away because they're off center. But the other thing that I have done before in episodes of this has been to use a little bit of reverb or G-verb, whichever verb. They're slightly different is all. I just like having more than one way. These cows are very small. Those outside are far away. Okay. Is take and make sure it's, you know, well down at -30. I also low pass filter it so it's not too metallic.
Right. Oh, right.
See, and part of it is the proportion of real voice to a sort of echo voice. Never did watch Father Ted. Because the louder this gets.
Right. Oh, right.
The closer it sounds, obviously, but it's also the proportion of voice to reverb. When the voice and the reverb.
Oh, right.
Because our ear is kind of hearing that as that's how much it echoes before it reaches me.
Right. Oh, right.
you know, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a lot of reverb, but, you know, just a little bit even can change where the person is in the soundscape. Do you remember, oh gosh, back in like episode 2 or 3 of Teeth Within, when Annie goes into the kitchen to get the teapot, and I threw a little bit of reverb in to make it sound like she'd passed into another room and we were hearing her with a different shape of air around her. Because reverb and echo and room tone and room machine, I mean, not room tone, but room machine, are all about the sound of the room that you're in. And the idea is that the different shape of a room creates a different bounce to your voice. So, you know, when you're in a big room, you get big bounces. While you're in a small room, you get smaller bounces, but they're faster, kind of. You know, a big room, the echoes are appreciably after your voice because it takes so long for your voice to bounce off the wall or something like that. And so that's how you create these different illusions of size and space. You know, if you're going to use echo ever, you really want to use it carefully because echo can get away from you really easily. You always want to make sure, even when you're doing reverb, you want to leave space at the end. You don't want to cut off right after the voice because it needs tailing room. It needs room to tail off. But echo needs even more room to tail off. So if I use echo, just using the defaults.
Right. Oh, right.
I mean, the echo gets a little excessive. To be, you know, but you have to make sure you leave it room. If I up this by 10 and that by 10, just to...
Right. Oh, right.
I mean, the echo can get vastly out of hand if you have a lot of conversation going on. I mean, you only use echo in the most, if you absolutely have to. I mean, you can use it for monsters, you can use it for effects, you know, for limited things, but the minute you have a conversation in an echoey space, it just turns into gibberish, unless you keep the echo really quiet. I mean, one thing you can do, you can pull all the conversation people in closer and leave the echoes, like, way out at the edge of the...
Right. Oh, right.
So that the focus is on the voices that are right in the middle, while the echoes are off to the edges and you can kind of ignore them, but you know they're there. The last question that I had from the internet was, let's see. I do need to work more on my room spaces, specifically for the Trial of Myriad, because I do need to create a number of different cave and or corridor and or whatever structures, space to use and work with them very carefully. A lot of times, though, what it boils down to for me is I play it by ear and I keep undoing it until I get it the way I want it. Undo is always your best friend. Control Z, undo, edit, undo anything. If you notice here, you know, if you ever wonder what you just did, you go up here and it'll show you undo whatever your last thing was. Panning is the movement here. And it'll be like undo, amplify, undo, amplify again, undo, echo. You can undo through a lot of things and it'll tell you what they are, or it can say to redo them. And there's a point where it'll stop. Audacity is limited in that way, but you could go back, 20 moves or something. But that's why I'm always saving copies, so that if I have to go back past a certain complete change of sound, I can just go back to the previous copy. One of the things that is offered by other sound programs is the ability to back up a lot more and to back up past a closed document. In other words, when you close Audacity, it's frozen right at that point and you can never back up again. When you open it again, it starts from scratch with the backing up. So, but other programs offer that they maintain all those prior steps in the file with it so that you could open it up and then undo stuff. And I mean, that's one way that Audacity is more stripped down and simpler, and and not to everybody's taste, but that's why I keep lots of backups. I mean, it just puts the backing up on me instead of doing it itself, and I don't have a problem with that. The other question was about selecting specific music for certain moods and scenes and emotions, and that's one of those that is so very subjective. But when I picked the stuff for The Teeth Within, for instance, using my different linking music here, first thing I did is I picked a theme song. I actually picked two theme songs because there's this music. And then I found a second theme I liked, which I actually use for most of the linking things. Because this was a little too perky for all of my linking. A lot of the linking things I have are more like, this is sort of a pondering kind of link. It's like, I'm thinking, while others are more sort of it's like, that's sort of an ominous but not completely bad thing, like, something else is going to happen soon, or whoa, it's gonna get worse.
What do you...
And all of these were just chunks of a larger piece that I picked out for the feeling that they gave me. I mean, all of these different linking pieces. Yeah, we're going to see some action somewhere else. And all of these are actually parts of a piece. Let's see, what was it? It's like, I'm sure it's in here somewhere. I think it's this one. No. It would be then this one. Now this is a piece of music from Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com, and I picked it for the overall sound. Now, if this is named Marie Celeste because it's inspired by the Marie Celeste, obviously the bells are ship bells. Well, see, now there's a nice piece I didn't use. But MacLeod is really good at creating music with many different things going on and layers to it that, and sometimes even changes. Oh, there's a good one that I should use. I mean, overall, this is an ominous piece of music in a lot of ways, but if you're familiar with the Marie Celeste, that's not really a surprise. As you can see, I'm taking the gain down a little bit to try and balance against my voice here. But there's all these great pieces, but I was looking for pieces of about 10 seconds that I could conveniently use. This would be a great theme for something really ominous, especially on a boat. And then here, I think I used this piece. No, I didn't, but I used... This is a really... how much of this did I use? I swear I used more. Well, there's part I used. But you can see there's so many different places where you can pick from the, to use for linking music. And yet it's all an entire piece of music. But that's part of choosing it, is finding things where you can pick a few different pieces out of it so that they all sound consistent with each other for linking music, but at the same time they're kind of distinct and give different feelings. And that's one of the things I don't know that I can say how I do it, because a lot of the times it's just kind of by the feels, which doesn't help. So, you know, it's very difficult sometimes to explain how to pick music for, you know, emotional impact or whatever, because it is kind of something you just kind of have to feel. A lot of times I'll almost arbitrarily, yeah, the entire piece is fairly ominous. I mean, and part of it is just listening through a huge number of music and seeing what catches you and what you feel like has enough different movements in it to be usable. I mean, by comparison, the piece that I use for the opening and closing, which is this one, is really frivolous. I mean, this is more, it's an exciting story, but it doesn't really have the depth to it, which is why I picked from two different pieces. And yet they sound like they go well together within the context of the story, because they're not right up against each other, and because it kind of has a tonality to it. I don't know how to explain it beyond that. This one, for instance, that first part sounds fine, but there's parts in it, if I remember correctly, where it starts to sound a little too electronic, almost. And, you know, I wouldn't use those parts for a Victorian story. It's that drum machine, but I mean, this part, I mean, this is totally like hip-hop or something. But the first part, the part that I use for the opening and closing, works fine for a Victorian story. It's got that sort of movement and that sort of, you know, choppy, almost like player piano kind of feel to it. But again, I can't explain exactly why or how to use it. And yet somehow they go together. That's something that I've been able to do. One of the things that I'm very sad about is that I didn't keep any of my original workings on the recordings I did of Lovecraft from ages back. The really old ones when I was first learning to mix. I don't have the original mix files, the original Audacity files. I flushed them all because I didn't know any better. I mean, and there's things that you know to flush and things you don't, but they're not well balanced. They're not well mixed. They're not usually, I mean, I didn't clean the voice well. The voice is often a little bit, like there's artifacts and stuff because I didn't know what I was doing, or there's background noise. I mean, just, you know, but I've still posted them around. They're not super great, but what I did with the music in some of them is really, really good, even though it's super rudimentary. One of them I actually took, in Pickman's model, I took one piece of music, repeated it for the entire track. It was like 3 or 4 minutes long, but slowly started to, but once I repeated it for the entire track, I copied it and then reduced the copy by a minor sixth, and then just slowly faded it in throughout the entire course of the story, which is like an hour long, so that you've got this slow, super slow fade in of the music just making your skin crawl eventually. I had to keep the volume way down on it because it was too jarring, otherwise it was too crawly. But I was just like, oh my god, that was awesome. I should do that again. And I'm like, oh sure, I'm never going to recreate that. I am probably going to re-record Pickman's model, because if you haven't looked at the animated hound that, shoot, I should have the link handy. that was done. He wants to do Pickman's model next, and I want to re-record it because the sound is so tragically bad. I mean, as I said, everybody has a learning time. If you want to look at what I did to start with, just to reassure yourself that you can get here, go listen to the Lovecrafts I did. And if you want to listen to like the earliest episodes I mixed for this, that would be it would be Making Book and Within the Walls of Eric's. I believe those were my very first two. And they're not perfect by any means, but they're actually pretty good. So part of it is just having a dramatic ear, which I don't know that can be, you can learn anything, but there's always a certain bonus to having talent to start with. But you learn things like having a dramatic ear by watching a lot of movies and seeing how pacing is and things like that. Not so much by, okay, you should leave this much time between these sentences and this. It's not a number crunching thing. It's a gut feeling thing, which makes it really hard to teach. Do we have any more questions? This has been sort of a question and answer session simply because I don't have the voices to finish off this episode yet. The one, Mr. Whipple, and I need to. I do need to start cleaning out the voices for episode 9 at some point, just to get them all into their own, all cleaned up and then in their own spaces. But, and that's going to be one day as we get down to it. But, no more questions? Okay, well, I'm going to wrap this up for the recording, and,